Hi. Hello, everybody. My name is Dan Vlahos, and I'm an assistant professor of visual and performing arts at Merrimack College. For those that don't know Merrimack, it's just north of Boston. Today, I will be giving a talk on the interdisciplinarity of digital product design. I've broken up today's session into 4 parts: an introduction, an interview with my brother Jeff, who is a digital product designer, and a few case studies and examples just before we wrap up. Please feel free to ask questions as I go, or feel free to just wait till the end of the session. Before I begin my talk, it is perhaps prudent to give some background information into my long-standing interest in interdisciplinary creative work. After working for over 15 years as a design professional, in May of 2017, I completed my MFA in dynamic media at Massachusetts College of Art and Design. Any other DMI alum?
No.
Oh, close, but Mass Art alum.
Class of 88.
Yeah, cool. The title of my thesis was The Education of a Communication Designer. The cover of my thesis book, shown here, and I brought one copy of the thesis book if anybody's interested in taking it home. At the very least, it would make a good doorstop. So my thesis research was deeply informed by the anthology The Education of a Graphic Designer by legendary graphic design educator Stephen Heller. Stephen Heller is a prolific design writer, and in the spring of 2007, he penned an article in iMagazine entitled, "What Do We Call Ourselves Now?" which asks the question, in a world of brand specialists and information architects, is it enough to call ourselves graphic designers without sounding overly specialized or, in Heller's words, obsolete? Heller goes on to describe how it was W.A. Dwiggins who first coined the term graphic design in a 1922 newspaper article. The term graphic design and the profession of graphic design did not achieve widespread usage until after the Second World War. Before graphic design, commercial artist and later graphic artist were the accepted labels for one who performed the interrelated acts of drawing, comping, and laying out text and images together to create communication. Heller states that in modern times, the term graphic design is now becoming obsolete. Citing his intentional exclusion of the term in his co-founding of the School of Visual Arts MFA Designer as Author program. To further his point, since 2007, we have seen many more disciplines develop alongside graphic design. Seems like this list changes every day. These include branding, information architecture, user experience design, and digital product design, just to name a few. Communication design, which is a term that is growing in use, could be seen as a broader umbrella discipline with many subsets or concentrations within it. And among them are graphic design, user experience design, and interaction design. This semantic position informed the title of my thesis, The Education of a Communication Designer, which of course is a play on the title of Heller's anthology, The Education of a Graphic Designer. The subtitle of my thesis, 7 Speculative Projects in Learning Experience Design, further reflects my own focus and interest in exploring the possibilities for and the implications of applying this expanded interdisciplinary practice of communication design, specifically to the design of learning experiences. Within Heller's book, I came across the following passage by Professor Gunnar Swanson of East Carolina University, who in 1994 authored a call to reconsider graphic design more broadly as a liberal art. Swanson wrote, "We must begin to believe our own rhetoric and see design as an integrative field that bridges many subjects that deal with communication, expression, interaction, and cognition. Design should be about meaning and how meaning can be created. Design should be about the relationship of form and communication. It is one of the fields where science and literature meet. It can shine a light on hidden corners of sociology and history. Design's position as a conduit for and a shape of popular values can be a path between anthropology and political science. Art and education can both benefit through the perspective of a field that is about expression and the mass dissemination of information. Designers, design educators, and design students are in a more important and interesting field than we seem to recognize. Swanson's call for design as an integrative field deeply informed my 7 graduate case studies. The 4 subjects he mentions, communication, expression, interaction, and cognition, became the 4 key themes that united all of my 7 projects. Today at NERD, I want to briefly explore and share some of my thoughts on digital product design, and specifically to consider the interdisciplinary nature of this work and how it may evolve into the future. It is perhaps useful to look at this emerging field through the lens of Gunnar Swanson's aforementioned 4 subjects. Here's where, sadly, I have to announce a major change in the session as it was originally planned. And in some ways, if I may say so, this is a curse of good fortune. I had originally hoped to present alongside my brother Jeff, who is a full-time digital product designer in Boston. Here, we are going to need to play a little game. Since 2015, Jeff has been a digital product designer at a Boston-based startup that for today, we will call Startup X. In June of 2018, Startup X was acquired by large company X, and due to an extremely strict non-disclosure agreement, neither the startup nor the company that acquired it can be mentioned by name in this presentation. And for now, Jeff can't talk in public about his role in any of this. Does anybody have a guess or know what business this was? Well, we could talk after the presentation. Raytheon. No. Okay, good. No, much more positive than Raytheon.
Well, that's good.
A business that we can feel pretty good about. So there's Jeff on the right, and on the left are the studios of Startup X. Jeff was very kind in lending me his time and thoughts as I prepared for this presentation. Jeff started out as a traditional front-end web designer and was one of the first employees at Upstatement, a Boston-based web design studio. Interestingly, Jeff studied graphic design, but no longer strictly considers himself a graphic designer. In preparation for the session, I asked Jeff a series of questions, including why he no longer purely identifies as a graphic designer. There were 15 questions in our interview. Today I will share 4 of them. But I would be happy to send you all 15 questions and answers if you're interested in having them. Again, the first question for Jeff was, do you consider yourself a graphic designer? Why or why not? To this, Jeff answered, yes and no. Yes, from a skills, tools, and process perspective, but no in the sense that I would not identify as what most people would define as a graphic designer. To me, graphic design is the use of typography, photography, iconography, etc. to tell a story or communicate a message. Throughout my process, whether it's designing a user flow diagram or the look and feel of a user interface, I'm using those tools and skills to communicate a message, but oftentimes doing so in the context of a larger product or experience. The second question I had for Jeff was, in your opinion, what is the difference between a UX designer and a digital product designer? Here, Jeff says, a digital product designer is a UX designer focused on designing digital products. The term UX has had its share of misinterpretation, though, so to address that, in my experience, many people have confused UX designers as just a graphic designer who designs websites and apps instead of logos and posters. Some people, even in the field of design, think that being a UX designer means that you can code websites and apps as if the X were just some techie variation of a UI designer. While these skills and roles are certainly inherent for some UX designers, I believe UX design is a broader field with a less specific scope. A UX designer is someone who designs the end-to-end experience with respect to user needs, business, or other environmental factors and technological opportunities. The third question for Jeff was, is there a skill that we are not talking enough about when it comes to designing digital products? Here Jeff says, writing. Every part of the product design process involves writing. Writing the project brief to communicate the big idea, naming the organizational sections of an information architecture diagram, to make logical groupings, writing the copy in your prototype so that it's easy for users to navigate, writing a user research plan for how you'll test your prototypes with users. And lastly, I asked Jeff about interdisciplinarity. Interdisciplinarity is a term that refers to the combination of two or more disciplines to achieve a new level of integration. I asked Jeff, to what degree would you describe your team as integrated or not, and why? Jeff says, I would describe our team as very integrated. As integrated teams of product managers, designers, and engineers, we are problem and solutions oriented rather than discipline oriented. Because of this, we are able to more quickly and successfully work together to solve problems, adapt as things change, and learn collectively from our users and from each other. My next mini case study looks at the work of Alexandra Klaus. A few years ago, I participated in a mobile application design workshop with Klaus, who at the time was a UI/UX designer at Intrepid Pursuits in Cambridge, Massachusetts. On the left is a screenshot of Intrepid's homepage. I found it interesting that Intrepid markets itself as a creator of digital products at the intersection of humanity and technology. Also intriguing is the fact that Klaus herself was not trained formally in design. On the contrary, she has degrees in rhetoric, English literature, and has studied religion and philosophy. About halfway through her presentation, Klaus mentioned that her firm is getting lots of requests to work on IoT projects. IoT, for those who do not know, stands for Internet of Things. The Internet of Things simply refers to the interconnection via the Internet of computing devices embedded in everyday objects, enabling them to send and receive data. But in the media, a common catchphrase is that soon your refrigerator is going to be talking to you. This got me thinking, what if, as a digital product designer, we took that catchphrase literally? What I mean is, if a refrigerator could talk, what exactly would it have to say? Well, as a designer and educator of communication, I'm both interested in what a refrigerator would say, but even more interested in how it would say it. An early Internet of Things hit was Amazon's Echo smart speaker. On Christmas Eve of 2015, the voice-controlled Echo was one of the top 5 items ordered on Amazon. Amazon's Echo was followed by the introduction of Home, a competing voice-controlled smart speaker from Google, and now everybody knows Apple has one too. Voice-controlled digital interactions are becoming increasingly more common and hopefully less awkward. Klaus now works at a firm called Optimus Ride. Her title has shifted from UX/UI designer to product designer, but she self-identifies as an experience designer. The second of my case studies and examples looks at Dave Schlafman. By chance, does anybody know Dave Schlafman? On the right is Dave Schlafman. Schlafman was co-founder of the 4-time Emmy-nominated animation studio CloudKid. In late 2015, Schlafman announced that he was ceasing operation of CloudKid to take on a role leading design for a robotic startup called Jibo. Jibo was described as the world's first social robot for the home. Jibo was led by social robotics pioneer Dr. Cynthia Brazil of MIT. The question I had, and the one that is most relevant to this talk, is why would a robotics startup hire a cartoon animator to lead design? Here's a clue from John Markoff of the New York Times, who described Jibo as a robot with a little humanity. For those of you that never got to see Jibo in action, let's watch this short video demonstration.
This is your house. This is your car. This is your toothbrush. These are your things. But these are the things that matter. And somewhere in between is this guy. Introducing Jibo, the world's first family robot. Say hi, Jibo.
Hi, Jibo.
Jibo helps everyone out throughout their day. He's the world's best cameraman. By intelligently tracking the action around him, he can independently take video and photos, so that you can put down your camera and be a part of the scene.
Jibo, take a picture.
He's a hands-free helper. You can talk to him, and he'll talk to you back, so you don't have to skip a beat.
Excuse me, Anne?
Yes, Jibo.
Melissa just sent a reminder that she's picking you up in half an hour to go grocery shopping.
Thanks, Jibo.
Anybody own a Jibo?
Do you?
No, but I'm smiling because it didn't work out quite as planned. Let's say it was more of an experiment than a success. So Schlafman left Jibo in 2017 when he was hired to head up design for a new group at Netflix called Interactive Originals. How many people have experienced the Baldersnatch episode of Black Mirror? Nobody. Ooh, you put this on your list. Notice that I used the word experienced and not watched. Black Mirror is an anthology series about the darker side of technology. Episodes of Black Mirror can often be unsettling because the storylines feel like they are one update away from happening in real life. Baldersnatch, the show's newest installment, released in December of 2018, takes that unsettling familiarity to the new level with an interactive element that allows viewers to control the story plot through a choice-based interface at the bottom of the screen. This next mini case study looks at a project by the contemporary art duo Elmgreen and Dragset. In Drama Queens, Scandinavian artists Michael Elmgreen and Ingar Dragset created live performance screenplay featuring a cast of remote-controlled, iconic 20th century sculptures. Each personified sculpture takes its moment in the spotlight, with the play embarking on a satirical and insightful take on the shifting nature of contemporary art. In considering this work, I wondered how Elmgreen and Dragset went about creating expressive personifications of the sculptures. What would Jeff Koons' rabbit sculpture say if it could talk? What would the voice sound like? What kind of personality would it have? From the creator's perspective, what kind of work is this? Art? Experience? Theater? Writing? Directing? And lastly, here are a few personal examples from my work at the Dynamic Media Institute at MassArt. In this project, I envisioned the installation of a sound and motion sensors along with a series of framed, high-definition screens in Boston's Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum. When a museum visitor enters the room, an actress dressed as Gardner, the founder of the museum, appears on the screen and interacts with the visitors. Here again, one of the biggest challenges was not only in deciding what Isabella would look like or say, but how she would say it. Well, let's see if she can play.
I'm not usually one for bronze. I've spent many summers in Venice. Well now, I suppose culture isn't for us all.
So here are some series of definitions for the word personification. The first reads, the attribution of human nature or character to animals, inanimate objects, or abstract notions, especially as a rhetorical figure. For another graduate project entitled The Perfect Character, I demonstrated how typographic forms can take on human qualities through the shifting of form and the use of animation. You get the point. Even the loader screen animation on your favorite website says something about the persona of your brand. Here's another good example of form and content with just a little personality. In the examples we looked at today, the skills possessed by individuals and teams are interdisciplinary and integrated. Isolated skills once used by animators, writers, directors, and anthropologists are all being infused into the digital product design process. In my teaching, I now make a concerted effort to infuse traditional graphic design and typography projects with these new modes of thinking. In this assignment, each student receives an envelope that contains a single uppercase letter and a random personality trait. I then ask the students to render their letter or character in such a way that it visually personifies the included personality trait. Some traits that are included are adventurous, playful, calm, creative, gentle, dull, lovable, quirky, and tough. Here's a quote from the famous mid-century graphic designer Paul Rand. Rand says, "Design is the method of putting form and content together. Design, just as art, has multiple definitions. There is no single definition. Design can be art. Design can be aesthetics. Design is so simple, that's why it's so complicated." If things were complicated in Rand's time, then how do we manage the vast complexity of designing digital products and communication in our time? So what has changed since Rand's time? And how does it specifically relate to interdisciplinarity and to digital product design? In 2005, Chris Pullman, one of my long-term mentors in the Boston design community, wrote an article entitled "Some Things Change," which listed around a dozen significant changes in the communication design professions. For the purposes of this talk, I have selected 5 that are most relevant. Well, the first is, once graphic design meant flat, static, two-dimensional. Now it encompasses multiple hybrid media. It is not just visual, but involves a variety of senses, more like life itself, which plays out in a 4-dimensional world. Number 2 is, once what you were making was an object, now it is more often an experience. Number 3, once the designer's art was composition, now it is choreography. In a fluid 4D world, the problem is not so much how to get the fixed thing right, as to find an elegant sequence of evolving relationships. This involves understanding how the conventions of typography and the dynamics between words and images change with the introduction of time, motion, and sound. 4, once you made it stay put. Great care was taken to get everything in just the right spot, just the right relationship. Now, increasingly, the output is a variable, not a constant. Think of the way your design decisions look on somebody else's screen or device. The new problem is to design the rules for the relationship of things, not a single predictable outcome. Number 5 is perhaps the most relevant to this talk. Once you could do just about everything yourself. Paul Rand ran a 1.5-person shop for most of his professional life. Now the paradox is that while your personal computer and plunging software costs have revitalized the tradition of the one-man band, a publishing house, or a post-production studio on your desktop, the trend is towards collaborative, multidisciplinary teams of people pushing towards a common goal. It's not just your opinion anymore. Collaboration calls for a different set of genes, a different kind of ego, a tolerance for complexity and consensus. In conclusion, when viewed through the four lenses of communication, expression, interaction, and cognition, and through the work being created and the people creating it, one can come to the conclusion that the digital product design is, and increasingly will be, an interdisciplinary endeavor. Thank you.
I have a question on the slide of the assignment that you gave your students. One of the directives was to indicate rather than illustrate. Can you explain that, please?
Yeah. It's so funny because this goes back to Paul Rand in some ways. You know, a lot of early design students, their inclination is, let's say, with a logo assignment. If we're doing a logo for a landscape company, let's use a lawnmower, or let's use trees, or something that is put on a spectrum, illustrating rather than indicating. The problem with this is if the landscape company starts to do other things, like, in a couple of years they start watering lawns, or then they're doing snow or whatever, then their logo needs to change. And, I think we try to design in such a way that can be expressive, but also flexible. This is a real challenge, right? How do you, if this is a spectrum, right, how do you find that balance between projecting meaning and being able to sort of accept meaning as well?
Thank you.
As an engineer who is looking to get better at product design, what would be like some really good resources that would, like, as someone who really has like no knowledge at all, there's a gap, where would you suggest I look?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. Maybe this is kind of just what I'm interested in, but I think continually the work that has been coming out of the MIT Media Lab provides a good indicator for what people are doing now, but also what things might and could look like in the future. I think it's like, I guess my answer is really like, don't look to the past, but look at what people are doing now and try to anticipate where things are going. I think the Media Lab is one of many good places that you could look to get a sense of that.
I'm wondering if you can say a word or two about, as an educator, where in the curriculum you would fit in sort of more traditional ideas about human visual perception and these things. I feel like it's, full disclosure, I feel like we're making such an effort to downplay those skills.
Yeah.
I feel like they might be getting lost completely.
Yeah, and for the most part, right now what you see is most of those skills end up at the tail end of the educational process. So for undergraduates, in like the senior year in some sort of like capstone or thesis project that has them do deeper research, has them kind of get out of the studio a little bit more, start to use some techniques from anthropology and other disciplines. Also the same sort of the graduate level. But I think in the past few years start to see that stuff being pushed earlier and earlier. And in my mind, I think it would make sense to start with that stuff, given all these changes, right? So that people can use those tools all the way through their educational process and know that it should be, at the earliest stages of any project. So I think a lot of places are still catching up, but that's what I would do. I would push it earlier and really kind of encourage people to approach this, in an interdisciplinary way, to use research techniques from different disciplines. And that's where I think the most interesting work is starting to appear. Any other questions? And thank you all for attending.
Do we do that?
Thank you.